Father, may you break our chains. O Mother, may you heal our scars. What price must we pay for you to send your child unto us? For the chained and the scarred, for the broken and the damned, let us never forget the redemption price.
Welcome to The Black Butterfly, Book 1 of the Sacred Blood series by Sarah Yuher. 1. Bread in the Night. Ravenized Dawn, 8311. Airlias. Working in a damper barracks isn't all that bad. As long as one keeps their head down and doesn't make themselves too noticeable, the Dampiers tend to leave them alone. When she was just a babe, Airlias had been bought by the barracks matron. She had no memories of her parents or even where she came from. Sometimes, she would daydream about them as she worked. Her mind paints a beautiful picture of two humans in love, running from their vampire masters. She would wonder whose hair she had. Was it her mother who had that soft chocolate-colored hair? Or were Airlias's golden eyes the eyes of her mother? Did her mother have fair skin? Did either of them share the strange mark on her chest that had always looked as if she had been freshly branded? The only lights in the room were the torches and sconces on the walls and the 2 candles Airlias had on the table. She rolled her shoulders as she stretched before returning to the dough. She had been baking since she woke up at sundown. At sunrise, she would finally be allowed to go up to the slaves' rooms in the attic and get some rest. Typically, there would be another with her baking for breakfast and prepping the dough for lunch, but the girl had been caught stealing from the granary. As she thought about it, Airlias shivered despite the kitchen's heat. Slaves who were caught stealing were sent to the cattle barns to be bred and fed upon by whatever vampires wanted them. Airlias never wanted to be sent there. Airlias shook the thoughts from her mind and finished prepping the dough and shaping it into loaves to be baked for lunch by the next shift. She walked over to the oven, took the paddle, and checked one of the loaves. After she studied the bread, she began to remove the loaves. She smiled to herself, proud of how well they'd come out. Though she was a salve baker, she still took some pride in her work. Good, hard-working slaves were valued and sometimes even given extra food. She put the hot loaves with the others before she grabbed her cloak and went outside to the firewood shed. When she walked back into the kitchen with her arms full of wood, the matron was already inspecting her work. Airlias set the wood down and curtsied. "Good morning, ma'am." Barracks matron Bethany was a plump woman with fair skin and graying dark hair. Her green eyes were gentle as she looked over to Airlias. "Good work, girl." She turned from Airlias and to the pantry. Airlias resumed the task of tending the fire in the oven. She stood up and dusted off her woolen skirt when she was done. "Take your breakfast and go back to your room," Bethany said as she began getting the prep work for breakfast underway. Soon, the farm boys would come with eggs and milk from the chickens and cows. Airlias smiled at her food as she wrapped it in a napkin. The matron had given her the typical leftover bread, dried meat, and cheese. But she had also added some dried apples as a reward for a job well done. Airlias put her meal into her apron pocket and retrieved the water bucket from the table. As she left the kitchen, she headed to the well to gather some water to clean up before bed. Winter had just ended, and spring was well on its way. The few trees on the grounds had green buds of new leaves, and all that was left of the winter snow were piles that fought the melting heat of the morning sun with all they had. She followed the stone path to the well as the sun began to creep above the horizon, giving her the first glimpse of a massive tree surrounded by the forest far to the east. Airlias stood at the well for a moment as she watched the sunrise, and not for the first time, she wondered where she was. She knew she lived in a barracks in a mountain range in Seorai, where young Dampiers trained to become soldiers for Lord Frostfang's army. As a slave, though, much knowledge beyond that was deemed useless to her by her vampiric masters, so she was never taught any geographical knowledge. She was taught how to cook, clean, sew, and a host of other chores deemed necessary for the smooth running of the barracks. When she was 15 years old, Matron Bethany saw her talent for baking and put her to work in the kitchens as a baker. The only thing the slaves were taught outside of those tasks was who their master was. Lord Frostfang was the vampire who owned these barracks and all that lived within them. Considered to be one of the most ruthless vampire lords under the rule of the Lich King Absalom and his vampire queen Nefarian, Frostfang may have had one of the smaller armies of the vampire lords and ladies, but it was the most highly trained. He was also the first vampire lord to elevate Dhampirs to positions of authority in his army, giving his army more maneuverability. Most vampires only used vampires as their elite soldiers and commanders. Frostfang included his Dhampirs. A unit with no vampires could move through the day with no problems, and since Dhampirs didn't need to feed on blood like vampires did, the army didn't need to waste resources on cattle slaves. If the need came when the Dhampirs needed to feed for healing purposes, human slaves trained as foot soldiers could donate the required blood. Lord Frostfang's army was fast, deadly, and could strike any time. And when night fell, it was only strengthened with the addition of his night children, Briar, Delvin, Vex, Byron, Rex, and Bran. All of them were masters of the blade and had been turned as rewards for battles won. Lord Frostfang himself and the mighty dragon Seraphina only added to his army's strength. His other night children, Rose, Loki, Loren, and Mindin, were the ones who generally ran the day-to-day workings of his hold, making it one of the wealthiest and self-reliant holds in CRI. All of this was taught to slaves so they could know and appreciate the power, strength, and generosity of their master. Aerlias drew water from the well using the ladle attached to the rope to drink the cold, refreshing water. With one last look at the tree, she headed towards the slaves' rooms. The path took her through the gardens that provided vegetables for the kitchens. She waved at the garden slaves already hard at work as she passed by. Elric was there. He smiled at her as he waved back. Tall and broad with honey blonde hair and sky blue eyes, his bare chest and back were already beaded with sweat as he worked the earth for the spring planting. Like most of the slaves that worked outside, his skin was sun-kissed caramel. A few of the men working alongside him snickered. The jokes they made at his expense carried off in the wind, so she couldn't make out what they said. Aerlias giggled as she left them for the staircase that took her to the attic rooms. She headed towards her room on the north side of the attic. Like all slaves' rooms, her room was small and bare with a single window. Since her primary job was at night, she was given a room with a west-facing window so the light would wake her with the sunset. She had a cot on one side of the room and a low dresser across from it with a small wooden wash basin on top of it. Her dresser held 4 more woolen skirts and cotton blouses each, a few pairs of socks, undergarments, for more aprons for her work, and her spare bandana. Aerlias pulled off her plain, sturdy boots and set them by her dresser. Then she stripped off her clothes and apron and put them in the wicker basket at the foot of her cot. Her laundry had recently been done, and slaves who worked in the laundry rooms would return in 3 more days to retrieve and wash her dirty clothes. She poured water from her bucket into the basin, took her soap bar, and used the cool water to wash her arms and face. Later, when she woke for her next baking shift, she would be allowed to go to the women's bath for a more thorough cleaning for her kitchen work. Aerlias put on her soft cotton nightgown before she took the dirty water to her window and poured the water into the gutter outside her window. Her window had a view of the apple orchard that provided the barracks with its apples and the mountains to the west. Their misty peaks were still capped in snow. Most years, they stayed snowy at their highest peaks even through the summers, though a few years ago, a sweltering summer had melted that snow for a few days. The kitchens had felt like ovens, even with the doors propped open. Aerlias closed her eyes and momentarily enjoyed the spring breeze before she returned to her room. "I think I'll leave the window open today." She went to her cot and climbed under the blanket, grabbed her meal where she had left it on the foot of her cot, and began to eat. Aerlias sighed contently and smiled as she ate and listened to the morning's bird song. Her world was small, but she was okay with that. She didn't need much more than she had. For now, she would enjoy it. This summer would mark her 18th summer, and by tradition, when a slave turned 18, they were either paired off with a suitable mate to bear children or were presented to the vampires as offerings. Aerlias frowned at the thought of being presented to the vampires. In all the time she had been a slave, her whole life, She had somehow managed not to be bitten. She had never even seen a vampire with her own eyes. Lord Frostfang only had 10 fledglings, the fewest by far of all the vampire lords and ladies, and as far as anyone knew, none of his fledglings had fledglings of their own. Since she was sent to work in the baker's kitchen, whenever Lord Frostfang or one of his fledglings visited the grounds, they never had any reason to see the kitchens. And when she worked on the cleaning done during the day, the vampires were sleeping. Aerlias finished her meal and made sure there were no crumbs left. Then she laid back in her cot and stared up at the ceiling. Aerlias fell into a dreamless sleep as the sounds of Dampier's training began to float through her window.
Enter the world, but tread with care. Those roots remember every prayer. Carved from ash, from bone, from flame. The sacred beasts don't play or game. Here change comes swift on silver wing, with dragonflies that bite and sting. Truth flickers soft and sharp as steel, and every wound must learn to heal. Don't come armed with hollow lore. This world won't let you fake the war. For those who think they understand, you'll bleed the fastest by your hand. So read and ache, be torn apart. These stories rise from broken hearts. With grit and teeth they scream and soar. You've never known a world like this before.